Alright, so a lot of people have the wrong idea about a lot of things. And some people seem to think that they know the truth and they are forgetting basic history of the world. So we're going to set the record straight this afternoon. I'm not going to look anything up because this is stuff that you should all know in general if you studied any amount of ancient history, world history, etc. Okay? Like, even a cursory look at the history books will tell you this. Here's the problem. International trade is based on a lie of novelty. Now, originally speaking, that lie of novelty was based off of the region. Oh, we have novel goods from this place and this place and this place, but we don't have them here, so we can set the value for the people at this place to pay this amount. Here's the problem with that. When it became ubiquitous enough that each and every one of these items was easy enough to manufacture and maintain in each location, that novelty wore off, effectively meaning that international trade would have eventually died off on its own due to the fact that everyone basically had access to the same stuff. Barring, of course, climate sensitive, like fruits and vegetables. Those have always kind of been an issue, but now we're kind of at the point where you can, if you have enough money and resources, build ecosystems, small ecosystems to effectively manufacture certain things in locations anyway. So, moving forward a couple thousand years, and we have a situation where world national governments in NATO and not in NATO, these are like governments for certain countries, have started implementing certain taxes and other things, regulations, that are, by the way, artificial in nature, and I'll get into that in just a minute. One of those regulations is something that the Democrats and Republicans love to use as a campaign moniker to try to get more people to vote for them, and that is the words minimum wage. Here's the thing. Minimum wage was set due to certain abusive policies here in the United States because certain companies were not paying people a living wage. They were being forced under the table effectively because they were not being able to make enough money to survive. And it didn't used to be that way. It only happened after companies realized they could get away with it. So that's where it started. Okay, and the minimum wage was based off of the what's the word there? The cost of living. Here's the problem with the cost of living. It's not a solid number. You could sit there and you could make every regulation in the book. Oh, we can adjust it all you want. Realistically, you'll never be able to adjust it fast enough. It's just not possible. You're talking about a market that shifts on a daily basis, and it's just kind of garbage. It's garbage regulation. Instead, what would have been more productive is if companies were held to account by a federal ethics bureau that is controlled by all three houses of government, judicial, executive, and legislative, under consistent review from all three with civilian oversight. Effectively making a business oversight bureau of sorts. And if a business is not adjusting its wages accurately to the area that people live in, then, you know, they should get dinged for it or should be corrected for that mistake effectively. Yes, that is effectively federalized control over business, but the reality is that those those price differences from area to area are also artificial as well. Number one, it does not cost your town or your state anything for you to operate as a business out of there. The only expense that you are costing them is the use of their transportation infrastructure. That's it. That's all you're costing them. Your actual cost of business is to your employees. And state and federal minimum wages artificially inflate and deflate that number based on whether that number goes up or down, which is again artificial, therefore a lie. It is not reflective of what your employees need. It's not reflective of what your company needs. It is in fact a lie. 100%. It's why these regulations are outright stupid to begin with. Oh, yeah, you live in Maine. You can make $15 to $20 an hour working at Walmart or McDonald's flipping burgers. Yeah, sure. And then what happens to the price of burgers and groceries at the grocery store? Right on up the ladder. Hey, guess what? It happens. And there are a lot of people out there who say, but the statistics say, yeah, well, the statistics can eat my nuts because the statisticians that are responsible for those statistics don't actually have to live with the price increases and see them anyway. So, yeah, those statistics are false. Another set of lies to keep the minimum wage laws in place in the first place. The only real reason that minimum wage laws have even a remote amount of ethical place in this world is whereby making it so employers can't abuse their employees. The problem is that there's plenty of other ways they can. Without even talking about their wages. So, yeah. Here's the other problem that we have with international trade, tariffs and exporting business. Tariffs are also based on a lie. The lie being told by tariffs is that your nation cannot sustain itself. Well, here's the problem with that lie. If your nation can't sustain itself, it's not even a first or second world nation. You effectively live in the third world. That is the truth. If you live in a first world Western nation or even in the Eastern Bloc, i.e. Russia, your nation is completely self-sustainable. Arguing that you need another country or you need another import or export is actively false and a lie. The United States does not need Canada or Mexico, just like Russia doesn't need China, Ukraine, or North Korea. Effectively speaking, it can sustain itself if it has to. And that, I think, is the thing that a lot of people fail to remember. You have the ability in your own nations and countries to grow the food and make the energy and make the goods that your country needs in-house. You do not need to go anywhere if you choose not to. And that part right there is the important part. Is this whole lie has fuzzied the world's governments. And I don't mean that to mean like the WEF or the WHO, NATO, or some bigger world government. No, I'm talking about the governments of these international nations. International trade and the lies surrounding it have forced their hand into believing that they need other nations to survive. The reality is no, they do not. The only reason China claims it does need more territory is because they've had a population issue, which is completely different from an economic issue, but it can contribute to economic collapse. And unfortunately, in times past, the normal best way to deal with this situation would be to have some catastrophe happen and cause the human population in an area to effectively shrink, either by natural causes or some sort of war or something like that. The problem is that we live in a world where such things just aren't really likely to happen anymore. And it's not really a big problem, it's actually a good problem to have, because it means that people are finally starting to get along. which is a good thing. It's not a bad thing, for the most part. There's always bads that can come with goods. See what I did there? So how do we break the lie? Get rid of minimum wage? No, there's no real reason to do that at this point. Because the federal and state minimum wages in most states and through the federal government is typically speaking lower than the cost of living anyway, and it's just kind of whatever. It's just another way for politicians to curry favor with voters, and that's about all it's worth. The problem is not actually the amount of currency being forced around, it's actually the lie of the value of currency. See, here in the United States, it's actually the perfect example. We became the world standard for effectively money. Here's the problem with that. We have absolutely fucking nothing to back it up, except for military might, and that's it. That is literally the only thing that we have. All of our oil, yeah, gone. We buy it from other nations. We don't manufacture it here at home. We haven't, at least for the last, well, let's see. When Donald Trump was president the first time, we did have energy independence, but over the last, 4 years, we hadn't. And prior to Donald Trump, we were begging and pleading for oil in other places, which has a military long-term strategic purpose of draining other people's resources and calling it a day. The problem with that theory is that it is based on a lie as well. We do not know, actually, how much oil is under the ground. We could be siphoning off giant oil reserves that are interconnected worldwide, and we don't know whether they are or not because we have no way of doing deep ground scanning that can tell us, beyond smaller pockets that are maybe 2 miles down. We have no way of knowing what's any further than that, and whether they are interconnected or not. There's just no way for us to know. We could effectively all be living off of the same supply and just pretending that it's not. And there's really no way to know one way or the other. So it's a pseudo lie in that nobody knows, but they're operating like they do, which is effectively lying. It's sleight of hand to make people do things a certain way because of effectively fear of resource consumption. The reality is, we don't know how much oil actually exists underground. We just guessed. We took the land mass, we took the scannable area that we could locate under the ground, we calculated that number and approximated the rest. There are some that we couldn't even 100% measure. So when people say, oh, the oil's gonna dry up, it's a lie. It is a lie. There are more than 5 wells worldwide that we could not scan deep enough to see how far down it really goes. It's stupidity, arrogance, and idiocy is really the only thing keeping international trade afloat. So to cure this problem, we would need to have a really hard landing, sit down conversation about these topics and actually say, hey, look, we know that we have oil, we don't know how much we have, we don't really know how much you have, we don't know how much is sitting under Britain right now because no one's bothered to look, and even if they did, they don't exactly have the land mass to flop a refinery down to do anything with it, even if they wanted to, so that doesn't help, So yes, in some situations, exporting and importing is good. What's bad is lying about how much this stuff costs to import and export. Realistically speaking, yeah, Exxon Valdez was a bad time for everyone. It was one of the worst oil spills in history. How many other shipping tankers had spills like that? Because I only remember hearing about the one, and we heard about Deepwater Horizon, which was a whole other event that was actually caused by negligence of a company and other things. And these are why these regulations need to exist, for sure. But they don't need to cost as much as they do. And that is the problem. The problem is not that they exist. The lie is coming from how much it actually costs to have inspectors go look at these facilities. Sure, they might be paying the inspector himself, $5,000. The problem is that they're turning around and charging the company $10,000 to $20,000 for a $5,000 inspector visit, basically, and that is effectively the problem. Number one, you're charging a company for an inspection that you're requiring them to have, which is wrong. You should be offering that service for free, number one, and paying it out of your own governmental pockets, not the company's coffers. That is a problem that I have with that. It is effectively deceitful governance. Number two, you're going to turn around and spin it like they owe you $20,000, which is effectively $5,000 for the visit itself and $15,000 for a permit, which took you 2 seconds to print out on a piece of paper, stamp a 25-cent seal on, and all in all costs you maybe, if you're in a poor country, about $2 worth of resources. I'm sorry, that's a crock of shit. It does not cost that much to send people off to an oil rig to put a stamp on something and say, yes, he's fine. It's all good. He can keep doing what he's doing. And people like to sit there and say, oh, but there's all these legal costs and yada yada, insurance. Insurance is a scam, but it's a necessary scam. Insurance is a scam in that they charge you ridiculous amounts of money that sometimes, actually in a lot of cases, you never end up needing in the first place. Let me put this to you in a way that you will understand. I had a car accident about 3-4 years ago. I wrapped my car around a tree, and I broke a piece of fence and I bent a signpost, okay? Now, labor, resources, and everything else to put everything back the way that it was that I damaged cost right around $200. Now, my insurance was going to pay me out, and the price of the vehicle because it was a total, right? Which I had paid into. How much do you think I paid into that insurance? I'll give you a hint. It was closer to about $5,000, $6,000. How much do you think I got paid out for that accident? It was right around $2,500 out. I didn't have medical injury. I mean, I could have. I didn't go to the hospital. Which, by the way, if you ever get in an accident, don't do what I did. Go to the hospital and get checked out, because even if it is something small or minor, which, by the way, mine wasn't and almost cost me my life, you should seek medical attention after such an accident. I ended up having to spend $75 to stay at a hotel. Gave myself a look over in their bathroom, took a shower, curled up with my Bible effectively, and was basically still shaken up and, rocking back and forth on the bed that I was effectively going to be sleeping on that night. And then a friend came and picked me up, and all was well. Anyway, back to the point, however, there's still like $2,000-ish that was, sitting in that insurance that I paid into my insurance that I should have had access to, but I didn't. Well, you could argue cost of operations for the insurance company all that you want, but the reality is that an insurance company is basically your own private piggy bank that's managed by, that could actually be managed by a computer system and about 20 people to handle the, nationwide claims and automate the claim process. And then you just have, especially on the automotive end, you just have the friggin' police handle the inspections and tell them whether it's a total loss or not. Realistically speaking, it could happen that way. And it would cut costs for insurance companies quite a bit. The problem is that insurance companies employ mass amounts of people under a false notion that these people are actually required to make sure that the job gets done. The problem is that the job itself isn't really that necessary. You should be setting money aside for rainy day funds and emergencies and accidents in the first place without having to pay for insurance fees and costs and other things. You should be able to, as an American adult, budget and handle your finances on your own without having an insurance company hearkening over you saying you need us. That's not remotely acceptable. Because you don't. You actually don't. If you budget yourself properly, you can be your own insurance. And the fact that people don't understand this is just a testament to the laziness and the lies that we've all been fed. It's just like the old Hollywood agents, right? The "you need me" crowd. Well, I hate to break it to them, but if the person's intelligent enough and has the ability to do these things on their own, they don't need you. If I were rich and in Hollywood, I would 100% be my own agent. Absolutely. Because I know how to read legal speak, I know how to handle finances, I know how to do quite a few things. In fact, I'm one of the people who, even from the outside, I can tell you how much real corruption is in the United States government, and Doge is just scratching the surface. People like to say, oh, they're the sledgehammer and they're trying to take down a tree with a chair. No, they're like scratching at it with a screwdriver. They haven't even come close to trying to cut the tree down. They're standing there with magnets and a screwdriver trying to make sure there's no railroad spikes in the friggin' tree that'll cause massive injury, aka spiking a tree, before the real people that come in to do the job of taking the tree down come take the tree down. Doge is not really... I'll put it to you this way. Doge doesn't really have authority without Trump. Trump is the president, the leader of the executive. He's the one who gives them the authority to cut things. And when they say it's got to go, then Trump can come in, rubber stamp it, and say, yeah, it's got to go. With certain very, very limited exceptions. And here's the thing that pisses people off. Congress cannot dictate day-to-day operations of the executive. It's called separation of powers. The president can't do it back to them, nor can the judicial do it to the executive, or vice versa, or the judicial to the legislature. It is separation of powers 101. What they have to do is effectively bargain and barter for things to work. I.e., I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Here's the thing that people get wrong. Without the executive branch, legislative and judicial have zero enforcement authority. Absolutely none. Outside of their own walls, effectively. The judicial branch does not have an armed forces or a national guard or the ability to declare martial law or arrest people. They can sit there and say you're under arrest of contempt of court, but you have to be, again, inside their own walls. And those bailiffs that are assigned to them, who do you think is responsible for their paycheck? It's not the Supreme Court, it's not the courts themselves, it's the executive branch. That's part of that I scratch your back, you scratch mine. So when they sit there and they try to tell the executive, no, you can't fire these people, no, you can't cut this money, the executive says, or you'll what? They can't do anything. And they know they can't. They're just trying to act bigger than they actually are. I will also note that this does not necessarily apply to the Supreme Court in the same way. The Supreme Court is kind of separate from the district courts a little bit. The district courts do their own thing more or less, and unless things get egregious enough that the Supreme Court decides they have to act on it, then they usually don't. A lot of cases just get thrown out of the Supreme Court because they don't think it has the... what's the phrase? It doesn't have the merit to stand before them effectively. It's arrogance and pride, but the reality is it's also management 101, If you took every case, just like if you took every trade, you would not be able to process. You wouldn't be able to process them all in time. Um, and that is the big lie. You are, as a nation, any nation on this earth is better off maintaining its own population on its own. 100%. We have enough farmland here in the US, and oh, by the way, Canada does too, maybe to a lesser degree, but they also have a smaller population. But we have the resources to do this stuff for ourselves. The only reason that we don't is because we're told we can't, which is based on a lie. We can, 100%. It just requires paying people enough to do it and charging enough without going overboard on how much you're charging in order to make ends meet either way. And that is kind of the hard balance of it all, but it is entirely possible to do. It's just people don't want to do it because they're lazy. They're like me. They'd rather sit at home and bitch about things than actually go out and do it. The problem is that you have too many versions of me, and the hardworking people out there don't have the mental ability, and the few that do want to keep their heads down, to the point where nothing gets done. And then when people like Donald Trump, who actually have kind of both, they have the financial wherewithal to do this stuff, comes around and actually starts trying to correct the course of the ship, then there's a lot of groaning because a lot of people realize that it means more work for them that they didn't want to do in the first place, but, without failing to realize that they're going to starve themselves to death by not tending to the farm effectively. They're literally like, what Donald Trump and what the world needs to realize, or, well, he does a little bit too, when you don't work, you don't fucking eat, okay? Your food needs to come from somewhere, and if your work is not coming from internet creation, content creation, or book writing, game development, which is, by the way, working in the artistic fields is work as well. It might not be seen as work by those in the hard labor industries, but the reality is that it's all work. It is all work. Every day, every single day, I'm having to do something on a game that I'm trying to develop, a book I'm trying to write. I'm on here basically screeching up and down about games and politics and world trade stuff, which is also work. It's something that I've had to research and learn, and I've done the historical research. I can tell you as a matter of fact, all of this stuff is all based on foundational lies. 100%. We don't need tariffs in this world. We don't need these regulations, bar maybe like 5% of the ones that exist in this country. And if you were to cut all but about that 5, maybe 10 tops percent, we could actually outperform the rest of the world if we chose to. The problem with doing that, by the way, there is a problem with that, and I'll dip into that here in just a second. And we could be great, we could be amazing. Here's the problem with doing it, like I said I was going to get into. Then you effectively become the magnet that is drawing the knife closer to someone's chest effectively. You can become a victim of your own success, and it has happened throughout history where you become so good at a thing and then it just takes one very small, like teeny tiny small thing to go wrong, and it all comes undone, and a lot of people get hurt in the process. So what does that mean for the world? Well, here's my advice, and I'm going to wrap this up here within the next 5 minutes. My advice is to make America great again. Sure, do what needs to be done to make us above and beyond. But as soon as we can afford to put the shirt back on our own back and put food in our own cabinets, turn around and show the rest of the world how to do the same thing on their own without having to rely on us or anyone else. That is the big thing. And then, once everyone is all set up, there will be no more need for, oh, we need to expand to here. It's a phone call, not a military action of saying, hey, we need a little bit more space because our population is through the friggin' roof. Can you help? I mean, if we had done this in the first place, places like Russia and China wouldn't be having economics issues. There wouldn't be conflict. It'd be a phone call, not a fight. And by the way, if we had done this in the first place, back during our Industrial Revolution period, Germany would never have embraced the Nazi movement. But we didn't. We did not do this. We thought about what we needed for ourselves and only ourselves, and didn't teach everyone else, okay, well, this is how you create an assembly line. This is how you put your workers to work without killing them. These were all important things. The nations that were out there had to learn it the hard way. Why? Greed. It all comes down to greed and power mongering, effectively. Politicians didn't want it to happen because then they couldn't control the masses, and companies didn't want it to happen because dollar bills, y'all. And now they're both paying the price because the everyday average citizen of the world is sitting back looking at their folly that led to the collapses that we've seen and all the issues that we've seen, and they're just sitting there shrugging, and they're like, you know what, you made the fucking problems, you can live with it, we're gonna go do our own things, we're gonna raise our own chickens for our own homes, we're gonna go cut and treat our own lumber, we're gonna develop our own tech on our own, and the rest of you guys in power can go pound sand. The politicians strike back by not because they don't like it, because they don't get their control, and the companies lose their money, and then you end up in a situation where we are right now, where a lot of people are voting for this populist candidate, which isn't really populistic at all, it's just more traditionalist, of wanting America to go back to the way it was, where people did raise their own food, where, you had a farmer in town that sold you a dozen eggs for 25 cents a dozen. And that 25 cents from a couple hundred people more than bought the feed that he needed for his chickens. It was really that simple. It really was. And, I mean, if you did things the right way, the way that they're supposed to be done, places like in my own state, DaCosta's Egg Farm, what was it, Oakland Dairy or Hood Dairy or something like that, we used to have here in Maine. I think it used to be Hood. No, Oakhurst, my bad. Oakhurst would still be in mass operations here in Maine, and things would actually be going pretty good. People would have employment opportunities, not just, government jobs that are artificially created and artificially funded at taxpayer expense. But that's basically, in a nutshell, the whole story, and why the tariffs are happening, and why all the trade disputes are happening, and why the federal government's involved with trade at all, even though it doesn't need to be, barring very small, very limited things, and yet there we are. And the environmental regulations thing is all just one big friggin' fraud anyway. If you don't agree with that, YouTube, you can eat it, because the reality is most of the quote-unquote contextual fact checks that you have put under these videos are from Wikipedia, which is not an authorized information source at any school or college, so therefore you have less authenticity in your fact checks than public school and college. Sorry, but that doesn't hold the test of time. Throw some real research in there from a real organization and stop with the BS, and don't bother with the WEF. Most of their stuff exists to propagate their own existence and is lies anyway, so eat it. I don't care about their existence. I care about the existence of every other human on the planet as an individual. I don't care about governments. Your politicians can suck it. As far as I'm concerned, oh, we have the red button. No one cares anymore. We're done living under these lies. We're done living under the threats. We just want to live and be left the frig alone. Which is true of 98% of the population of the world. The remaining 2% are religious extremists and gender ideology extremists and World Economic Forum supporters, effectively. So, pound sand. Anyway, like the content, hit the like and subscribe button, leave a comment, share it amongst your friends. If you want more research on the topic, I sure can pull it out, but I'd really rather not have to. It's kind of a nuisance to have to go through every single history book and show you these patterns throughout history. But again, if I got enough support on the idea, I would do it. In the meantime,